Welcome to the Heartland Journal podcast with Steve Abramowitz, editor-in-chief of heartlandjournal.com.
Howdy, y'all. Welcome back. I'm Steve Abramowitz, and this is the Heartland Journal podcast. Please hit that subscribe button and pass it around. Thanks for doing it. On this show, we are focusing on our nation today with always an interesting person making a positive change in our community and lovers of truth. Today, we're talking with special guest Michael J. Wynne, W-Y-N-N-E. Anthony Michael J. Wynne, attorney, sorry, not Anthony. I got to read my own writing. Attorney Michael J. Wynne focuses his practice on U.S. federal criminal investigations and trials, specializing in international money laundering, seizure and forfeiture of real property and other assets of foreign nationals in the U.S., and Foreign Corrupt Practices Act investigations. He also has had highly successful experiences with multilateral discovery extradition, import and export restrictions, sanctions, RICO, OFAC, ITAR, and international narcotics trafficking proceedings. He has represented corporations, individuals, and governments in sensitive matters in the U.S., Latin America, and the Middle East, including fraud and embezzlement and presentations of the results of international investigations to the U.S. Attorney, the FBI, Homeland Security, DEA, IRS, FAA, and other federal agencies. Assistant United States Attorney for the Southern District of Texas in the Houston, Brownsville, and McAllen divisions for a total of 12 years, earning multiple awards and distinctions in significant matters, including matters partnering with foreign governments. Let's talk to him about matters he can talk about, since many are confidential, but what he can will be fascinating. Buckle up. Hello, sir. How are you today?
All right. Thank you for that very generous introduction. Appreciate
Well, thank you for your service and all the things that you've done to keep America safe and keep the homeland American. We appreciate it more than we can ever say, but we're excited to have you here. So let's start off with talking about U.S. attorneys. We all saw Pam Bondi give as good as she got yesterday to senators on Capitol Hill in D.C., but what we didn't see was any U.S. attorneys sent out to take up cases from the Trump, first term era, and all the unlawful things thrown at him, from spying to mortgage fraud and rape accusations to assassination attempts. What is the job of a U.S. attorney, and why do you think they've been on the sidelines in Trump's second/third term?
Okay, there are 93 judicial districts in the United States. Okay, so Texas, for instance, has 4. Some less populated states are going to have 1. There's a United States attorney as a presidential appointee for each of those districts, right? Now, oftentimes, unfortunately, these days, it takes a while and an administration changes for a new appointee, to be made, appointment by the president, confirmed by the Senate. And this president has been very, very busy, as we all know. And some districts, the appointee has not come to the nomination process. So in the interim, they'll have an acting U.S. attorney appointed by the president, but that only is effective for about 120 days. After that, the district judges are supposed to get together and appoint an acting U.S. attorney. Most of the time, that ends up being non-political and being the same person who just continues until, that appointment takes place. Across the country, that's slowed down, partly due to just political gridlock that we see every single day.
So if I remember correctly, Bush fired 8 federal prosecutors, Bush Jr., and Clinton used that to get 93 U.S. attorneys appointed that were appointed by past presidents to resign, which you say that's all of them, 93. So that was under AG Janet Reno. Did that basically gut the agency and destroy?
No, not at all. What's been the norm since then is after every new president comes in, all 93 of them resign now. Because they know if they don't, it's just a matter of course since that day, that all 93 just resign. Acting takes their place and they remain acting until a new appointee, takes office. So there's nothing unusual about that now. And if any of them decide they're going to stay, they know darn well they're going to get fired anyway. So they, they
Okay.
resign. And
So
that's both
every 4 years,
administrations.
a new 93, let's call it,
That's
400 to 1,200 over 4 years. That's a lot of U.S. attorneys. Are there that many
it
to choose
is
from?
it is, but it hasn't really impacted it has not impacted the continuity of service, right? Because most U.S. attorneys' offices are run by what we'll call career prosecutors, love it or hate it, but others who have been there for 20, 25 years. Uh, and when I was there, I was blessed to have some great mentors who had been there a very, very long time. And those are who actually run the office and supposed to be across administrations. And until, past 10 so years, supposed to be fairly apolitical. Um, so no, it's become routine. Your U.S. attorneys themselves, the 93 of them, really are spokespersons for the offices, but don't make the day-to-day prosecutorial decisions. And I'll probably get back around to that when we talk about Mr. Comey in a bit.
Okay. So you uniquely worked with Mexico, which is under civil law, like most of Latin America. The U.S. law is different. Can you explain the main differences and how hard working or dealing with leaders in America only South is?
Sure. I mean, the main difference is that in a civil law country, Spain, France, I worked with the French government closely too. An individual citizen can initiate a criminal case. Okay, and a criminal slash civil distinction is not as pronounced in civil law countries. It's also drawn out. Okay, so instead of, say, individual witnesses coming into a federal grand jury that's driven almost entirely by the executive branch, you'll have a merger of the executive and the judicial branches working together to investigate a case. So someone who feels aggrieved of, say, fraud, they themselves can start the criminal case going instead of just having to go to a U.S. attorney and or a district attorney and try to convince them to take up the case.
Hmm. All right, interesting. So when we see riots in the streets of Manhattan or Chicago now or Los Angeles, I guess the claims would be a lot different than an individual who got in trouble for the exact same thing in Paris or London. Is that about
You know,
right?
that is a really interesting point, right? Because what happens now is you've got to rely on, say, Manhattan District Attorney's Office, or whatever county you happen to be in, to crack down and start, presenting indictments to be returned, criminal complaints, arrests, and direct generally your local police departments. Right. In some civil law jurisdiction, some private impacted, say, company, subject to, say, a ton of shoplifts, would be able to, initiate something on their own. That's a very, very, very interesting point.
Hmm. Well, we'll have to stay tuned and see how that works out because they also don't have a First and Second Amendment. They could use that quite a bit, but that will never happen. So
That
you
would
and
be
your
right.
you and your firm are noted for successfully handling a matter involving sanctions against Iran. I'm fully aware that there's confidentiality. You can't tell us everything, but they've been awfully quiet this year with all the Hamas and Palestinian liberation stuff going on that we just alluded to. Did Trump effectively silence them with the bombing raid?
Ah, gosh.
Or they
I
regrouping?
gotta say, yeah, it's been quieter. I gotta say, yeah, that's about all I can say.
Okay, all right, all right. Well, that's good. I guess that would be the ultimate success then, is they were being loud and we needed to quiet them and they've been quiet. So until
They've
further
been
notice,
quiet, but we
mission
also have to
accomplished.
be diligent to make sure that they cannot rebuild and that they got the message.
Oh yes, we need to be constantly vigilant because they will just spend a pause to regroup.
That's right.
Um, we don't have a ton of time together, so I'm probably going to jump around here, but I remember
Sure.
Enron very clearly. It was very
Yeah.
early on in my business and it mattered a lot. You were there in Texas at the
Right.
time. What role did Enron play in changing the legal and business and political climate of Texas?
Wow. Let's see. I was highly involved. I reported for Bloomberg from the courtroom almost daily. What did it do? It made everyone a lot more cautious, I think. And Texas has, God bless it, an entrepreneurial, enterprising spirit. Um, there were immediately in the wake of Enron a lot of corporate investigations initiated by various arms of the Department of Justice. Everybody kind of seemed to want to get a piece of the action, and some that were not terribly merit-worthy. So a lot of resources were expended in the years after Enron, and just so many people. Look, what happened there was incredibly complex, and Enron has more or less, become a huge stigma. There were a lot of real good people who worked there. And, I've met Andrew Fastow. It's a complicated situation. They were not entirely, evil people. How did it impact? Yeah, I think it made people be a little more cautious. And I think at the end of the day, being more honest and straightforward with your stakeholders can only improve the underlying foundations of your economy.
There are today more JP Morgan executives in Texas than on Wall Street, sort of a exodus because of all of the regulations and the taxes and
Yeah.
the impossibility of getting from your car to a high-rise building without being accosted in some way, shape, or form. Do you sense a move of the financial heart of America, which used to be called the center of the universe, to Texas?
Not only in that industries, in a lot of industries. I have another client of mine on the Southeast coast who's moving operations here. Seems like we hear about one or two, every day. And we're fortunate to have, an administration, business climate, and governmental bodies at the local level. Even, Houston itself is a blue city, our mayor and our city council. But I'll tell you what, they're far more committed to business than anywhere else in the country. And at least
More of a
here,
traditional blue dog Democrat than the blue coast Democrat.
well, there, and I know several of them, and I think they see what's in the best interest of the people, the economy, and have their heads on straight. So we're real fortunate here. We're real fortunate.
Okay, so Paxton and Abbott have had, constant attacks to fend off, of course, even to the point of their own National Guard going to help out in Oregon, no thank you, sir. Mostly about illegal immigration, but they saw how Obama treated Arizona for simply trying to enforce federal laws already on the books, not even their own state laws, just, immigration law that was already there, but Obama made a thing out of it. Do you think their time in office has been running scared of DC as the invasion continued on their borders?
Well, I'm not sure about afraid of DC. What I do know is the crackdown since Trump took office has been extraordinarily effective. I've been down to the border a couple of times since then, walked or driven parts of the wall, and it's worked. I was impressed with what the Attorney General, said yesterday about the deployment of troops to some of our cities to try to, control a crime wave. I thought that was extremely well said. And
So
she
do you
was
think
very
under
good.
Biden they were basically handcuffed and now Trump has let them off the chain and they can actually be effective
Oh yeah.
government
Oh yeah.
officials? So
Oh,
during those 4 years, were they just chomping at the bit, just desperate to try to get active, but weren't allowed to, and now they're dun, 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 here we are to save the day type of thing?
there was some sense of that among your Homeland Security agents and officers along the border who felt that they had the authority, but they were limited in what they can do. I think that's fair to say.
And so were they just
It's fair
waiting
to
out Biden for 4 years, 3 years, 2 years,
say.
or and maybe they breathed a big sigh of relief when Trump actually got sworn in, or
Yeah,
was
look,
it
I mean, we all want to do the job that we've taken on and been
yeah?
assigned to do. And our Homeland Security officers, our ICE officers are like that too. They took that position for a reason, and they want to do their job and not be handcuffed by some policy people. And dear goodness, getting rid of some of these DEI and other sort of policies that hamstrung our federal agencies has been a godsend, so that we can focus on just completing the mission.
And I asked that question not to, rub salt in the wound of Biden or kick him when he's down, but I saw the morale drop to almost zero in Seattle. I know what's going on in Portland still to this day, Los Angeles as well, and Texas is a different cut. So those guys who have been doing law enforcement immigration patrol for a decade or two. I mean, I talked to Tom Holman, he cried, he said, I've been so angry for 4 years, I want to get to work. A lot of them in Seattle quit. They said, I'm not going to do it because they thought it was hopeless. They knew that a new governor wasn't going to come in and all of a sudden turn it around on 180 degrees like Trump did. So did you get a sense, and then we'll move on, that those guys and gals in Border Patrol really were optimistic that a Trump was going to come soon and fix this? Or had you seen them the opposite? A lot of them left and said, I can't take it anymore.
Look, what I do know is that following Trump's, swearing in January, the morale across the board, increased and improved.
Including
That
in the
is
U.S. attorney's
unquestioned.
offices?
The U.S. attorney's offices, you're going to have, there is some partly frustration in nominees not getting through, nominations not being done. And let me clear one thing up that came out, I guess, earlier, complaints that the Comey prosecution is either vindictive or it's going to be held up because of the nature of the appointment in question about the authority of the new U.S. attorney there. There was a district court decision came out in Nevada last week that really kind of tossed that argument out the window, right? Because the one who has authority to present an indictment to the grand jury is the individual assistant United States attorney. It has nothing to do with the person who occupies the position of United States attorney. So anybody who bothers to read or research the law will find out pretty quickly that that's a non-starter. Nor is it a vindictive prosecution. Again, that is at the level and determined level assistant United States attorney who looks at the thing. Moreover, the fact that you got a split vote for a true bill suggests that it was fairly presented and that there was an intelligent argument among very intelligent people who cared a lot about the issues who voted. Otherwise it would have been unanimous, right?
They were obviously looking for their next Ken Starr or their next Robert Bork, who they could make it personal and say, "Oh, it's that person," as opposed to like, "Wait, nope, justice is being served."
No, these are these people who sit down and you have a split vote, which suggests you probably had an argument, and that's good. That's good that you had citizens looking at the evidence, doing an analysis, and taking a vote. It wasn't one-sided, clearly. They took time.
Much better than a Merrick Garland who would basically dictate what to do, and they
Run
would
it through.
show me the person, I'll find you the crime.
That's right.
Okay, the war on drugs and the immigration crisis, and of course, eminent domain for things like cattle farming and data centers. How aggressive has Paxton been to defend Texas ranchers from big tech and the cartels needing to move their drugs and people over your land?
Look, I don't know how Paxton does it. I get his press releases almost daily, and I know Paxton personally, and he's a force. I just don't know anybody who's done as much in attorney general capacity, especially with the type of attacks that have come on against him. He's been in the crosshairs every which way. And it keeps fighting for our citizens in our state. And
he reminds me of Trump and Scott Walker in Wisconsin. They just, from day one, it's just nonstop attack, but they just do
not nonstop attack. And he looks like he's going to prevail for nomination for senator from our state. And
So
God
will
bless him.
Chip,
He's a
will
fighter.
if he does, will Chip Roy make a good AG if he wins?
I I don't know. The crowd for AG here is very crowded yet, and I don't think it's sorted out, who's going to be in the lead. There's several great candidates that put their name in. We'll see how the voters go with that.
Okay. Well, it matters. We've learned that those positions are very important, especially for what you
Really
try to
are.
do. So you faced off against the cartels when you were U.S. attorney. Who are the nameless, faceless cartels? And did you feel like we made a dent in your time? Seems drugs and children are at a record high this year.
That's kind of the discouraging thing, right? Because kind of the myth of Sisyphus. You do all you possibly can. Um, But as long as there's, profit to be made, someone's going to get into the business to try to make it, right? And as soon as you knock a kingpin or one down, somebody else eventually rises up. What's the solution to that? It's not to back down. It's to keep at it and to keep at it and to keep at it. You just can't. You just can't give up. I can't try to describe to you, the sort of warehouses full of, say, cocaine that you're going to be able to find in different stash houses in the Rio Grande Valley, or the number of individuals that they'll pack into a house in some of these human trafficking or human smuggling operations without caring, what happens to people, and them dying kind of in the King Ranch and the huge hundreds of miles, between the Rio Grande Valley and San Antonio or major metropolitan area. We had our successes and celebrate them for a few weeks, but there's going to be somebody else. Same with public corruption. Same with public corruption.
And it used to be that you could rely on Arizona and Texas because I watched Washington and Oregon stop caring completely, California too. But now, with what we've been through, and it was like you just said, so much money. I think it's human trafficking has outstripped gambling and pornography in terms of profits. Like, if it's not for you in Texas, we don't have much. We don't have much because a lot of them have thrown in the towel and said, "Well, we can't beat them. Join them."
Well, thank goodness we have what, almost half of the border, in Texas. So we're doing our share. We're doing our best.
Yeah, that's true. And do you think the wall that remember Trump was running on the wall, and Mexico's going to pay for it? Do you think it really made a difference? Because I do know you have to put a wall on solid ground, and if you could get your wet feet onto the side of the fence that isn't on the other side of the fence, you're literally on American soil. You can be brought in. Do you think the wall is anything more than a symbol, or do you think it actually helped deter people coming through non-point of entries illegally?
Without question, it did help deter. And shoot, a few months ago, I drove along the wall from Del Rio to Eagle Pass. And I stopped and talked to, let's see, remember a Republican county chairman about it, who told me how it had helped. Now, what you're going to have is you're going to have concentrations of some small area where you necessarily have to have a gap in the wall, but they're all going to be coming through there. So, no question in my mind, that it has served a deterrent purpose.
Good.
And I was skeptical for a while about whether or not we could put in a wall of that length because it's a long way. But I think it's worked. I think it's worked.
Good news. Okay. So there's been a lot of reporting on Muslims buying large plots of land and creating Islamic centers, community centers, schools, Muslims only jobs. Really looks like taking over those areas for anti-First Amendment to the Constitution discrimination for themselves, not everyone else like you and me. Have you noticed this? Do you have any comments on that in Texas? Because there's a lot of land available.
There is a lot of land available in one site, comes immediately to mind. Look, I really think that's going to need to be litigated in the courts, and we're going to see some clash of constitutional rights. And usually when that happens, you're going to have something a decision that's based on underlying principles. It's going to have to be decided on a case-by-case basis. But you highlighted an issue that is going to be a battleground. I'm concerned in the fairly near future.
Yeah,
And we got a
Alabama had
free.
their 10 commandments on the courthouse steps, and Texas looks like they're going to have a, Islamic Sharia type law mass behind American religious liberty laws. It's going to be an ugly fight.
Well, it could be, and there's different branches of Islam, just as there are, and people. I'm thinking David Koresh, for instance, will abuse
Waco. Yeah.
Christianity. So you're going to have it. We just got to be real careful in this instance, particularly with the potential foreign influence. And I think of Iran, setting up some type of operations. Your various rights, free speech, freedom of religion, are gonna all kind of come into conflict. I sure hope it doesn't come to that.
Freedom of
We're just
assembly,
gonna have to
freedom
see.
of, yeah, a lot of, a lot.
As well as just national security interests of the United States.
And
Okay,
it certainly clash with the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. So it is going to be an epic battle, literally. And I think you're thinking of Epic City.
yeah, I sure hope that everything's resolved peacefully. We
Yeah.
can do that. We don't have to resort to any type of violent episode, and so I sure hope that we're able to have a constructive discourse about it and resolve it that way. I sure
Maybe
hope
more
so.
like a courtroom clash where like To Kill a Mockingbird as
Well,
opposed to something more Civil War like.
that's why we have courtrooms, right?
Yeah.
That's why we do this, and we fight these things out with words in a courtroom and with evidence.
Well, interestingly enough, didn't Greg Abbott just basically make Sharia law illegal in Texas?
I am I'm not personally familiar with that. I'm not in a position to comment. That's interesting. I'll look that up.
Okay. Texas is experiencing increased tensions between its booming data center industry and drought conditions. The
Mhm.
Alamo City facilities owned by Microsoft and the Army Corps have taken large amounts of water from drought-ridden areas, 50 billion gallons last year, Newsweek said, and that's growing. Are we headed for a showdown between Texas and big tech billionaires like Gates and Bezos?
Look, I think that's unfortunate, but I think our water rights have been an issue here for quite some time. It's coming to a head. We also have some treaties with Mexico that they've been violating for quite a while because we have reservoirs along the Rio Grande. And it's time to fight those fights, and it's time to, stop letting the Mexicans take so much of our water.
Yeah.
But even with that, I don't
They've been
know.
dumping their sewer into California's coast too, where the Navy
Yeah,
SEALs practice. So you guys have that in common.
yeah, yeah. But water is an issue now. And I would hope that as technology advances too, that the Bill Gateses of the world can find a way to operate, with less water resources. There's also ways to, locate these types of data centers closer to water sources. And I
That'd
would
be nice.
suggest doing that. We have a long coastline too. Let's try to do
It's
that.
sort of the Costco, Walmart business model where they look for the cheapest land out of the cities and get it so they can build it. And then they realize, well, wait a minute, we don't have any water to flush the toilet. So
That's about right. But we have, I don't know how many acres of windmills and solid coastal land that is available, large stretches. So there's a way to harness that. There's a way to harness that, and we all need to think longer term about the resources that are needed before we just start building things on the least expensive land we can get. And that's
That's
where
right.
government can come in too. The government can certainly help.
It's got to be
And safely.
habitable. They got to have people that easily use those data centers, not just to store pictures of their cats eating breakfast, but to live and work and go to work, right?
I
So
know.
I found it very interesting that former presidential candidate, longtime senator of Texas, Ted Cruz, he won re-election last year by 53%. But in 2018, he beat Beto by just 50.9%. So beat him by 0.9%, about 200,000 votes. That's it. Is Texas turning purple or God forbid, blue?
I don't think so. I don't think so. I think Beto had a bigger name back then and pulled a lot more. And you know, Cruz is just a master politician. And again, I know him personally. And I don't think we're going to see that close of a race this time. I think we're going to get a landslide, Republican victory next year in the senatorial race.
That would be Cornyn, the junior senator you're talking about.
Yeah, well, whoever gets the nom, I know that
Yeah.
Wesley Hunt has put his name in now, but whether it's Paxton Cornyn or Wesley Hunt, looking at the other side, I don't think they stand a chance, even in an off-year election.
Okay.
But no,
Big-
Texas is solidly red. That's not going to change.
Good. Because Dell and Tesla, moving to Austin way back when, they played a big part in that cultural revolution. Do you think the $1.5 billion film incentive, Senate Bill 22, they gave out thanks to Matthew McConaughey and Woody Harrelson, the actors, will help speed up doing Democrat bringing to Hollywood, to you? Or no, there's going to be a Texas way to do it and we're going to keep our culture intact?
There's going to be a Texas way to do it and keep our culture intact, even in Austin. Austin's very different than Hollywood. So Austin is Texan too, gets a lot of publicity. But Texas is staying Texas.
Okay, well, that's good.
That
I'm
was
glad
so planned. That's not going to happen.
that was the gist I wanted to get out of you. So I'm glad to
That's
hear
not gonna
it. But you do have Texas's AOC. You've got Jasmine Crockett, who's made a lot of headlines for her outspoken hate of Republicans in Texas and everywhere else for that matter. Lots of ugly talk about white people too. Do you think the Texas Democrat Party will find a home for her? Because you just passed a redistricting bill that basically drew her out of a job, which was great, but she doesn't seem to be going away. She's on TV all the time.
Yeah, short answer to that is no. Your average person on the street, whether they vote Democrat or Republican, here is pretty darn much common sense with very few exceptions. Very few exceptions. I don't think that stuff's going to find a home here.
Okay.
Really don't.
So she's short-lived. She went to college in outside Memphis, so she imported it. Let's just hope she doesn't export it.
No, that's not going to happen.
Good. Texas is the ultimate border state, regardless. Trump wants to do away with birthright citizenship that he now has to appeal. What do you think of that case?
All right. Look, I support, the president's initiatives. I have little to no hope that that initiative is going to be successful. Here's why. Is that the 14th Amendment, was passed in the wake of the Civil War. And the way it was written, it grants citizenship to anyone born in the United States and subject to this jurisdiction thereof. Those who are challenging birthright citizenship, hang their argument on those words, subject to this jurisdiction thereof. And those have to mean something, right, in context to give it some type of meaning. Well, here's the challenge. Back in when it was passed, and then this issue was litigated in 1898, right, with a couple of Chinese business persons who were here, happened to have a child, litigated, right? And what happened is subject to the jurisdiction thereof applies to children of foreign diplomats, children of an occupying force, which was still plausible immediately, after the Civil War, and until somewhat recently, children born on Native American tribal lands. Those exceptions grant meaning to the and subject to the jurisdiction thereof, because your child of a diplomat is not subject to the jurisdiction thereof. For that reason, I wish the thing might have been written a little different, but it wasn't. So until you get a constitutional amendment, I think birthright citizenship writ large is here to stay. And even this Supreme Court is going to have to hold that way. It's extremely clear.
It does seem like it was one of those poorly written ones, which is rare in the Constitution because it's such an amazing document, like shall not infringe, pretty much clearly says stop it. You keep trying, but shall not. That one is a bit gray area. So like, well, what does that even mean? You know, once
Well,
you're in
maybe
the
it was
custody of
hastily
ICE,
put.
are you now in the jurisdiction thereof? It's weird.
It is, it is what it is. And those are the words immediately after the Civil War, which was a slightly, different situation. But until it's amended, that is what it is.
The law of the land. Yeah.
They will not win. No, sorry.
Do you think Comey pleading not guilty today, even though he's caught dead to rights saying what he did to Flynn and Trump on TV, live on TV, he said these words. I could play the clips on Twitter all day long. Will he get off, or is he going away?
Okay, first of all, pleading not guilty. Everybody who comes in for an arraignment is going to plead not guilty. Nobody's going to come in and plead guilty right off the bat, right? Unless there's a written plea agreement. The written plea agreement, you're not going to have an indictment. You have a criminal information, right? So that said, that is absolutely no surprise. You saw the estimate 2 to 3 day trial, right? This is a very straightforward, simple case. Will it get off? No. No, I think it's cut and dry, conviction, which is why you're going to see these procedural mechanics by lawyers who charge double or triple my rate, piling up the hours to try to block it based on the authority of the United States Attorney or this theory of vindictive prosecution, both of which are enormous losers, right? Because even if this district court judge, who seems reasonable based on what I've read, even if, he dismisses the indictment, the government's going to take it up. And this Supreme Court is not going to let this, indictment die based on some procedural argument. So it's going to go back. My hope is that Mr. Comey comes to his senses and accepts a reasonable plea. I think a trial of something like this would be a travesty for the country to have to go through. But he's guilty, right? And that's the end of the story. He's not going to get off. Ain't going to happen.
Will it lead to others like his deputy at the time, McCabe, or what looks like his boss, Brennan, and ultimately Obama and Clinton? Or is this like he's the fall guy?
He's not the fall guy. He's the one who did it. Watch the clip.
He did it, but others were involved too, and he's the only one that we hear in the docket, I guess we should say.
Sure.
So that's my question. Will it lead to the others, or will it just be him and we'll be like, enough done, we're moving on. Hillary's off scot-free again.
I'm a big fan of taking things one step at a time. And so let's do this. Let's get him convicted and let's assess where we are and if the job is done or not. And then let's make a decision.
Okay.
And not get ahead of ourselves. And I'm just a big fan of that. It's kind of like the Border Patrol folks we were talking about earlier. We got our job, let's do it. And then let's make the decision about the next step.
Okay.
Let's do this, be successful, and win big, and then decide.
All right. Well, a presidential term is only 4 years, so things have to be moved along on a calendar.
Well, this could be moved quickly. This needs to move. This needs
sounds
to
like
move.
it sounds like they went for an easy one. Yeah.
Move it, right? And then we'll see, right? We'll see. Let's get it done. Let's
Another
not
easy
cast
one.
too big a net.
Another easy one. ABC News said Trump is pressuring federal prosecutors to bring criminal charges against New York AG Letitia James. It looks like mortgage fraud, pretty clear cut. You either signed the document or you didn't. Why do you think he needs to, as they said, pressure them? Why aren't they chomping at the bit to get an easy case to win?
Well, that's a really good question. That's a really good question. I wish I were in the room for that conversation. Because if I were the prosecutor on that, it'd be done based on the information I know.
There's a lot of those. Fannie Willis. I mean, it goes on and on. They're pretty. Adam Schiff. He either signed the documents or he didn't. He either lives in Maryland or he lives in California. It's pretty clear cut. You're a senator. You have to do that. So many instances of theft in government. We've got Florida today. A congresswoman or family siphoned millions to fund.
Oh my goodness! Yeah. Wow.
Last I
Yeah.
read, $6 billion stolen from housing and autistic kids. How low can you go in Minnesota under Tim Walz's nose? The first half of the 2020s have been a free for all, just in the news. I mean, we don't even know what happens that's in the closet. But more importantly, to me, it looks like easy cases to make since it's been so brazen and out in the open. Even immigration fraud, let's say with Elon Omar, do you hear from fellow U.S. attorneys that they have a caseload ready to go and these, darn radical judges are in the way? Did you feel that they'd go easy on Democrats anyway, and so they don't want to even bother and have a losing case, a losing track record, a batting average that's below average? Like, what do you hear from the folks who are supposed to do the job to police these things while these things keep going on?
Yeah. I don't I'm privy to sort of the information, here in Texas. I don't know assistant US attorneys in other parts, of the country. But I'm encouraged by what's happened with the Comey prosecution. Fannie Willis, I don't know what the delay is there. I really don't know. And I don't think that it's a fear of your federal judges, because when you file an indictment, file a case, there's kind of a wheel. You don't know which federal judge the thing is going to be assigned to. So I sure hope that fear of who the judge is not an issue, that's impacting a prosecutor's oral decision. The reason for the delay, that's sometimes beyond me, especially with this attorney general. You'd think that some of this would be moving more quickly. Hopefully, with the Comey prosecution, some of these others will get the message and start presenting these cases to a grand jury. I can only hope so. Do I hear frustration too much with assistant U.S. attorneys who have cases ready to go that aren't being approved? I gotta say some. Yeah, I do. Yeah, I do. I
Okay.
do. I do.
Well, I mean, they're humans, right? And the Moby Dick whale in this whole story is always George Soros and his son, George Jr. Trump went after the foundation finally with reports, DOJ plans to target him. Do you think that's more clickbait, or might we actually do something? The guy is 95 years old, so he won't even live to see the inside of a courtroom or jail cell, most likely.
Well, look, when there's so much smoke, there's fire. And I've wondered for years how he is able to do and get away with and have the kind of influence that he does. It's disproportionate, it's mammoth, and gosh, I wish I was still in DOJ to try to put that case together, because it's a RICO criminal conspiracy case if there ever was one. And man, I sure hope somebody does it. There's a case there.
Okay. A few minutes left with you, but it has been 9 months since Trump is back and not much retribution. Comey and Bolton are Republicans, so kind of easy pickings, I guess. Nothing on the left. We know about all Trump's enemies in DC, like Nancy and Adam Schiff and rhinos, still out to get him every day. What advice would you have for him and his DOJ, Pam Bondi, Kash Patel, I guess, as well, just to help him get through the next 3 years?
Wow. I think it is, and he's very good at it, is just avoid the noise, rise above it. And he's doing a great job of that. But and the Attorney General did, yesterday. Just stick to your agenda. You're going to have the haters, and you're going to have interests that, oppose you and are going to really have their own interests in mind, not necessarily those of the country. And just keep your eyes on, the end, the goal, and what you're looking at. And he's doing that anyway. He doesn't need me to tell him that.
He did seem to get knocked off his game a lot easier with whether it was on Twitter more or whatever the case may be. The first one, this one, you're right. He does seem to be more like, you know
That
what? Ask me any question you want. I'm not really going to put up with it this time, and I'm not going to sing and dance. Maybe because he doesn't have to run for reelection, whatever. Um, Insurgency Act and blowing up Venezuelan drug boats off of Miami. Should he use the act in Chicago, Portland, and LA against the now newest domestic terrorist group designated Antifa? And do you think he should blow those boats out of the water without what Rand Paul, the Republican, said was without due process?
Look, our foreign intelligence operations, I think, are second to none, particularly when it comes to identifying boats carrying drugs through the Caribbean or the Gulf of Mexico. I would think that that has a huge deterrent effect. May not be popular, but if you have sufficient intelligence with what those drug traffickers are doing to our population and our children, take every means necessary until it stops. Does that translate onto the domestic, front? I think that's a much harder question because it's more likely you're going to have a lot of collateral damage, right? It's not a body of water. You're dealing with an urban environment. So I'd be far more cautious. But in terms of the boats coming in, look, we've been trying to do something for a very, very long time. And I'm glad and heartened, that we're taking pretty effective action.
Excellent. All right. Well, on that note, Michael, sir, thank you very much for your time. Tell my listeners, please, where they can find out more about you, follow your social media, hire you as an attorney if you're open for business, anything you want to tell them.
No, we're certainly open for business. And these are very busy times, very busy times. Yeah, www.gwafirm.com. I'll give you my cell, 281-450-7403. If you're in Texas, look me up. And we're here to help any righteous cause and help people out there.
All right. Well, thank you for this fascinating discussion about Texas and our world today. I really appreciate it. Hang on, everybody. I will be right back.
If country ain't country, then this ain't gonna work. Oh, there ain't no gold in this new Nashville dirt.
Thanks for coming back. Please subscribe to heartlandjournal.com. Email address is all we ask, and never miss a new show, and it's free. Now the Heartland Journal news. When this now voted on 6 times and failed to get enough Democrat votes to reopen, DC saga ends. Lawmakers get to go back to DC in the cold of winter and vote on the big, beautiful bill. Have you forgotten about that? They also have to look at this, the upcoming Green New Farm Bill by Steve. The upcoming vote on the 2025 Farm Bill has sparked intense debate, as critics argue it is laden with provisions that align with Green New Deal priorities, favor big tech interests, and exacerbate the United States' growing inflation and national debt challenges. The Farm Bill, a massive legislative package renewed every 5 years, traditionally addresses agricultural policy, food assistance, and rural development. However, the 2025 iteration is being criticized for embedding costly subsidies and incentives for carbon capture, data centers, water allocation, and public land use for private interests, which may see as disconnected from the needs of farmers and rural communities as possible. These provisions, framed as climate-focused solutions, are viewed by detractors as giveaways to corporate and tech giants, driving up costs and contributing to the nation's fiscal woes. The Green New Deal, first introduced by Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Senator Ed Markey in 2019, is a non-binding resolution advocating for a rapid transition to net zero carbon emissions coupled with social and economic reforms. While not law, its influence is evident in recent legislation like the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022, which allocated billions for climate initiatives. The 2025 Farm Bill is poised to extend this trend, incorporating GND-inspired policies that critics argue stray far from traditional agricultural priorities. One prominent feature is the emphasis on carbon capture and storage technologies. The IRA already allocated significant funding for CCS, offering tax credits of up to $180 per ton of carbon captured, a sharp increase from the previous $50 per ton. The Farm Bill is expected to further incentivize farmers and agribusinesses to adopt these technologies, often requiring extensive infrastructure, While proponents claim CCS reduces emissions, critics argue it benefits large corporations like tech firms and energy companies, which can leverage these credits to offset their own emissions while farmers bear the financial and operational burden. The high cost of CCS equipment and implementation could strain small and medium-sized farms, many of which lack the capital to invest in such systems without significant subsidies. Additionally, the Farm Bill is likely to include provisions promoting climate-smart agricultural practices, such as cover cropping and soil carbon sequestration, backed by nearly $20 billion in IRA funding, redirected to existing USDA programs like the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, EQIP, which these practices aim to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. They often require farmers to overhaul operations, invest in new equipment, or forgo production land, all of which increases costs. Critics contend that these incentives prioritize environmental goals over food production, potentially reducing crop yields and driving up food prices at a time when inflation is already a pressing concern. The inclusion of data centers incentives in the Farm Bill is another contentious issue. At tech giants like Alphabet, Meta, and Amazon expand their digital infrastructure, as they do, they require vast amounts of land, water, and energy to power data centers. The Farm Bill is rumored to facilitate access to public lands and water resources for these projects, framed as supporting rural economies through job creation. However, critics argue this represents a giveaway to big tech, allowing private companies to exploit public resources for profit under the guise of sustainability that you pay for in taxes. Data centers consume enormous quantities of electricity and water for cooling, often straining rural infrastructures. By prioritizing these projects, the Farm Bill risks diverting resources from farmers who rely on water for irrigation and land for cultivation. For example, in drought-prone regions, allocating water to data centers could exacerbate scarcity, raising costs for agricultural producers and ultimately consumers. Moreover, the energy demands of data centers could drive up electricity prices. They have doubled in some places already, further squeezing farmers already grappling with higher operational costs. The push for public land use for private interests extends beyond data centers. The Farm Bill may include provisions allowing private companies to lease federal lands for renewable energy projects, such as solar and wind farms, or even experimental technologies like geothermal energy. While these align with GND goals, they raise concerns about the privatization of public resources. Critics, including Senator Mike Lee from Utah, argue that such policies favor corporate interest over public welfare, reducing access to land for traditional agriculture or recreational use, snowmobiles, skiing. Inflation remains a critical issue for American consumers, with food and energy prices significantly impacting household budgets. The Congressional Budget Office reported that inflation, while cooling from its 2022 peak, continued to hover around 3% annually, with food prices rising faster than the general rate. The Farm Bill's focus on costly climate initiatives risks exacerbating this trend. Subsidies for carbon capture, data centers, and renewable energy projects require significant federal spending, which critics argue fuels inflation by increasing government borrowing and injecting money into the economy without immediate productive returns. The IRA, a precursor to the Farm Bill's climate provisions, is estimated to cost between, get this, $780 billion and $1.2 trillion. It says over 10 years, but I think it's faster, far exceeding initial projections due to high uptake of tax credits. These costs are not fully offset by economic benefits, as many of the subsidized technologies like CCS remain unproven at scale. The Farm Bill's continuation of these subsidies could further drive up the national debt, currently exceeding $37 trillion, with interest payments projected to reach $1 trillion annually by 2030. Well, guess what, Steve, myself, it's there now, so I already screwed that one up. Higher energy and food prices are direct consequences of these policies. For instance, carbon capture mandates for fossil fuel plants supporting by IRA funding require costly retrofits that energy companies pass on to consumers. Similarly, redirecting agricultural land for carbon sequestration or renewable energy projects reduce arable land, potentially decreasing food supply and increasing prices. The American Action Forum estimates the GND-inspired policies could cost up to $93 trillion over a decade, a burden that would disproportionately affect low and middle income households already struggling with inflation. Heck, that's going to help even the top 1%. That's a lot of money. The national debt is a looming crisis, with the U.S. borrowing heavily to fund climate initiatives and other programs. The Farm Bill's inclusion of costly G&D priorities risks further inflation and inflating the debt, as subsidies for carbon capture, data centers, and land use change requires significant upfront investment with uncertain long-term returns. The House Budget Committee has criticized the Biden administration's environmental agenda, estimating that just a few of its regulations could cost over $845 billion. Opponents argue that these expenditures are fiscally irresponsible, especially when the benefits are speculative. For example, carbon capture technologies are still in early stages, with limited evidence of cost-effective scalability. Data centers, while economically valuable, primarily enrich tech giants rather than broadly benefiting rural communities. The redirection of public resources to private interests without clear mechanisms for accountability raise questions about the government's priorities at a time when fiscal restraint is needed. We will soon see, or maybe we won't if they stay closed forever, that government of ours. Not sure how they bridge the gap between trillions for healthcare for illegals and Republicans' desire to save money. Good old-fashioned Mexican standoff, we'd have to call it. So, good times are ahead. And interest keeps compounding. $37.8 trillion per USDebtClock.org will be $40 trillion by the next show that I do for you. Oh well, it's only money. That is it for this episode. Thank you, Michael Wynne, for coming on to tell us how Texas is doing. That's the ballgame, folks. If we lose Texas, we lose everything the founders intended for us. A republic, if you can keep it. Hope we can. With guys like Michael being our last stand, remember the Alamo. This is goodbye for now. I'm your host, Steve Abramowitz, editor-in-chief of HeartlandJournal.com. It's a live Wednesday show, so that means stick around for a bonus where Yaffe and I save the world. Please don't wreck it by next week. Peace in our time, and who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this. Esther 4. Glory to God.
Heartland Journal Podcast is the media property of HeartlandJournal.com, where you can find news stories, commentary, and content serving the heartland of America. Any views or opinions represented on the podcast are personal and belong solely to the creator and do not represent those of the people, institutions, or organizations that the creator may or may not be associated with in professional or personal capacity unless explicitly stated.